Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Oddly Specific. You know, this is one of my favorite things to do is to get oddly specific about something. And I am so excited to have my friend Katy Flaherty here today. Katy is a native Angelino. She's a stand-up. She's a writer. She's a left-handed cancer survivor. She is a sister. She is hilarious. And she is here to get oddly specific with us about a very specific episode of Babysitter's Club, the TV show from 1990. Katy, welcome to the pod.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to talk about this.
Well, when I reached out to Katy to do this episode, I said, first, I was just sort of like throwing ideas out there. I was like throwing some Dawson's Creek stuff out there. And then I said, were you a reader? And Katy said,
I think I said, "Fuck yeah." Or maybe it was, I was a reader. I think that's what I said.
because you strike me as a reader.
Mhm. Well, in this day and age, I am more of an audiobook listener because
Mhm.
of the attention span, but, pre-internet, back in the olden times, like, that was kind of it was like TV or reading.
And honestly, there weren't as many things on TV. See, the kids
No,
don't know. We used
no.
to have to wait.
That's right, and I don't know if you relate to this, but I grew up in a household that did not have cable. So, we watched a lot of PBS, network television, but, like, yeah, so there was a lot that I was missing out on. So, yeah, I read some books.
Well, and the thing that is so different now is if you didn't see an episode of something, I mean, that was kind of it. I remember I was punished once. I was punished and I wasn't allowed to watch Malcolm in the Middle, and I had to sit in the dining room working on my math homework while everybody else was in the family room watching Malcolm in the Middle, and I could just hear their laughter and just knowing like, in this day and age, you'd say, "Okay, well, next week I'm just gonna watch it on demand."
Yes.
There was no catching Malcolm on the Middle again.
Yeah,
I
wow, that is harsh, like, hearing everyone else watching and laughing.
Yeah.
Damn.
I was often stuck in the dining room, like, staring at fractions, being like,
Oh,
I wanna be where the laughter is."
100%. Oh my god, that's rough.
And now that's kind of where we are, right? Because we're both stand-ups.
Mhm. Mhm.
Honestly, how often do you use fractions every day?
I mean, never?
Right?
Occasionally, okay, every once in a while, I will have to, like, calculate something, and I'll be like, "Okay, so that's over that, and that's over that, and then this number like, just a basic, like,
Like
very basic.
quarters.
Yes.
But, like
Algebra no, pre-algebra level. Pre
right.
That's as far as I go. I struggled with math, for sure,
Same.
because I'm like, "This is boring." Like, the basic math, I got. Geometry, I also got because it was, like, visual and I could see how it related to things, but when it got into, like, algebra 2 level, I was just like, "I don't understand what's happening."
Who needs polynomials? I've said it once and I'll say it again. Do
Yeah.
you remember
I mean
those?
I mean, I remember the word, I don't remember what it means.
And look at us, we're thriving. It's
That's right.
10:30 on a Monday, and we're doing a podcast about a Babysitters Club episode of a television show,
Thank God we didn't learn the math 'cause,
right? Do
there are
you
a few people that need it, right?
Well, yeah, people we need engineers,
100%.
but we don't need to be engineers.
We sure don't.
When did you first get introduced to the Babysitters Club book series? Do you remember?
Okay, so I have to imagine I was around maybe, like, 8 or 9. I'm not sure what order it happened because I don't know if you remember this, but there was the Babysitters Club, but then there was the Babysitters Club spinoff, Babysitters Club Little Sister, about oh my god, what was her now I'm forgetting her name. She was in the episode.
Oh, I know her name because she was the original Karen.
Yeah. So it was very cool because so she's the little sister of, I wanna say Christy?
The stepsister, yes.
Stepsister, yes, and they had a blended family, and so that whole series was more about her, and Christy was there sometimes, but it wasn't like the Babysitters Club characters weren't, like, central,
Right.
but they were there. I was deeply into that series, and I feel like I might have started reading that, like, before the Babysitters Club books because they were shorter and like targeted at a younger audience, but it may have been in reverse. I can't remember because I do think I knew the characters going into that series.
I was the same way. I
Yeah.
was reading they were called the Little Sister books,
Yeah.
and I very specifically remember I had, like, gotten into them at school, and I loved them, and it was Karen, and she had a little brother, and sometimes she would go and stay at her dad's house,
Yes.
which is where Christy was, and Christy was, like, the cool stepsister, and then it was the summer, and in the summer, I would spend a lot more time with my cousins, a lot of whom were like 2 or 3 years older than me, which, like, can we agree that is like the coolest
That
fucking
is so
age?
cool. That is so cool. See, I didn't have that because I had just one younger sibling, much
Mhm.
younger, and then I didn't have any cousins because my parents were both only children. And then in our sort of like family friend group, where the people were like my cousins, I was the oldest. So I had no 2 to 3-year-old older mentors to like show me the way.
Well,
That
you
is
have like full oldest child energy then.
yes, totally.
I am an oldest, and I think I have a lot of oldest child energy, but I am also not the youngest, but I'm a younger cousin. So like I got put in my place
Mm.
a lot growing up, and this was one of those times because I came prepared for the summer of like vibing and hanging out and writing our skits and forming clubs that would just exclude people ultimately. Uh but I come in, I roll in with my Babysitters Club Little Sister books, and I'm like, "Check it out, guys. I got the Little Sisters books." And my, like, slightly older cousins are like, we read the Babysitters Club, like, the actual Babysitters Club."
Sure,
And
you sure?
yeah, this is Logan Likes Marianne, and you're still reading about, like, Karen going to ballet class, like, wow. So I was like, damn it, I gotta catch up. I gotta catch up. I gotta catch up with the kids. It's really interesting because I'm getting my MFA in creative writing, and this class that I took that was on YA fiction, one of the first things that we learned is that kids always want to read older. They want to read about kids who are slightly older than them because it's
Right.
very aspirational, which is so interesting to me. Did you have like any like older kids in your neighborhood that you were like, "Oh my god, they're so cool," or like anything like that?
I think the closest thing I had to that was, like, on TV because, the neighborhood I lived in was, like, very it was, like, largely Orthodox Jewish,
Mhm.
and so that was, like, maybe half, and then half kind of like everyone else, and so there weren't that many kids that like, we had our crew in the neighborhood, but, like, I was the oldest, and so
Yes.
I think, like, TV and books was, like, where I got that from.
I can remember feeling that way about Clarissa from,
Oh,
Clarissa Explains
yeah.
It All.
Yeah.
Like, I was like, that like, if I could have a big sister, like, that would be the big sister I would want.
Oh, totally. Yeah. We didn't have cable, but I did see Clarissa at, like, my friend's house, and she was very cool. Also, like, Blossom, I think
Yes. Very blossom coated as well.
yeah.
Do you
Yeah.
know Melissa Joan Hart is doing stand-up now?
No, but I'm not surprised at all because I feel like everyone is doing stand-up now.
You know? Great. Now we're competing with Melissa Joan Hart.
I mean, I'm sure she's funny, like, I mean
I mean, she has to have comedic timing, right? Like
yeah, 100%. Yeah, and then I bet it's, like, very therapeutic too if you're someone who's done especially doing TV and performing at, like, a young age where you don't have that much control over it, and then with stand-up, like, you can literally say whatever you want. It's just you.
she does seem like one of those child actors who came out of it pretty good.
Yeah, it does seem that way. I mean, you
Yeah.
never hear about her, like it doesn't seem like she's had that tragic arc, you know?
Right. Now she's doing stand-up with Caroline Rhea, good for her.
Yeah.
Well, did you have The Babysitters Club, if people don't remember, was a book series that came out in 1986 by Ann M. Martin, and it follows a group of friends who run a local babysitting service. The series captures the challenges and adventures of the club members as they balance their personal lives with babysitting responsibilities. And it centers on 7 young women who work in the babysitters club. And I'm wondering, was there a babysitter who you loved? Is there one who you related to?
I don't know if there was one I related to, but the one that I loved or the one that I remember the most is Claudia. Now, Claudia, they don't really get into this in the episode that we're going to talk about, but if I remember correctly, Claudia is a type 1 diabetic. And Claudia in the books anyway, I'm not
I
sure.
think it's Stacy.
Oh, is it Stacy?
It's Stacy.
Oh my God. Okay, because I don't want to get ahead of myself, but it's like a battle for her, right? Because she loves sweets. She has a hard time like controlling that. And I do think that comes into one of the episodes of the show because I seem to have like a memory of like a certain type of chocolate she was eating. I might have thought it was Claudia because in the episode we watched, she's like sneaking sweets and
Yeah, there's a
like,
lot of food shaming going on in this episode.
yes, yes, there is.
Yeah.
Although it also like that's how she connects to her sister is through the cupcake making.
Yes, we'll get to the cupcake making.
For whatever reason, the type 1 diabetes is like really what sticks with me, what stuck with me about it. Maybe because it was like more of a real problem than a lot of the other ones
Mhm.
series, you know? And I seem to remember she was always struggling to like manage it.
Okay, I have to tell you, if somebody asked me, like, "What's the biggest thing you remember from the Babysitters Club?" I'd be like, "Diabetes."
Right. Why?
I don't know, and I have to tell you that, like, it did scare me. I remember there was, like, an episode or not an episode, but maybe a book that was, like, Stacy and the Bad Choices, and it was, like the cover was, like, her grasping for a brownie, and
Oh my
I
God.
think this is what I think about it. First of all, it was not a very accurate depiction of, like, what I think diabetes is really like, because at the time, I didn't know anyone who was diabetic. Now, as I've gotten older and I've gotten to know people with type 1 diabetes, basically the way that the books made it was like, Stacy's not allowed to eat anything, and I'm like, "That's actually
Right.
not how diabetes works." And I also was very scared because, Stacy got type 1 diabetes because and she figured it out, or her family figured it out because she was at a sleepover and she had peed the sleeping bag. And then, they took her to the doctors and so I basically was like, any day now, I could get diabetes.
Oh, oh my
I could
God.
piss myself at the sleepover. I mean, it's I think it's good because it is something that kids go through, but I don't know that the Babysitters Club was doing the best job at, like, depicting what it was like. I was like, "Oh my god, I'm gonna get diabetes." And it turns out, actually, I was actually Mary Ann. My mom was gonna die. I didn't know that.
My
But,
God.
like, you know what I mean? Like, so basically they give everyone their cross to bear.
Right.
And,
Right.
you just latch on to, like, what that fear could be of having it, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think they talked about her like taking insulin and stuff. Like
Yes.
they got into it. But the thing is, type 1 diabetes, like you just kind of have, right? Like it's not like type 2 comes on over time and you have like some level of
So type 1, a lot of times kids are diagnosed, when they're, like, maybe a little younger than Stacy, but, like, my friend's brother was diagnosed, like, in 7th grade.
okay.
Yeah, so I think it can sometimes be, like, the hormonal changes happening in your body, and so I think it can just come on like that, like many things that can happen to people,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But, when you're 9, you don't really have all the tools to process that, like, this probably isn't gonna happen to you, and if it
Right.
does, it probably won't happen at a sleepover where you pee yourself.
Right, that's a traumatic way to introduce it, and it
Yes.
is compelling, and I get why, like, the author would have chosen that because it is I mean, this is what we remember about the books the most,
Right.
but I also think the time when the books came out, like, the amount of sort of, like, diet culture and the sort of, like, overall vibes around food in our culture was very like food shamey and it doesn't surprise me that that is like the thing we remember the most and that the author chose to include that because it's the character like struggling with just wanting to like be normal and eat brownies or whatever. So I think it like it hit, because
Yes.
everyone struggles with wanting to eat brownies and like, but for this character, it's like, well, this is like life or death, you know?
Right. And that's
Um,
also not exactly how diabetes, from what I know, works, right? Like
right,
I know people who are diabetic who can, like in the book, it was like an all or nothing thing. She couldn't have
right,
anything.
right, right.
So it wasn't really accurate. And I mean, I think like it is good to have a varied, group of young women experiencing different things in their lives. And,
For
I
sure.
think each one of them like was Christy and Stacy both, had parents who had gotten a
Right.
divorce. Marianne had lost a parent. Dawn's parents, I believe, were divorced as well. Claudia was living with her aging grandmother who was experiencing dementia.
Oh my God, I do not remember that at all.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Jesse, was one of the only Black families in the neighborhood. Mallory was the oldest of eight. That's adversity right
Yeah.
there. But I do also want to ask you before we get into this episode, like, what did you think of the concept of this book of like it's these young women who have a business?
Yeah. I feel like it's almost the thing, like, I remember the least about it. Like, it's so cool, and, like, they're like, even in the episode where, like, she's taking calls and, like, scheduling things, it's really cool and, like, kind of empowering, in the message it sends, but it's also, like, not what I remember, but it's not the thing that, like, sticks with me about the books. Like, what sticks with me is, like, the challenges the characters had or, like, the divorced family, and the individual characters' stories. But
Right. Like the actual small business running kind of takes a back seat.
right, but it is, like, very cool, I mean
Do you think it was a good business model?
it clearly works for the characters.
Yeah.
I think the reality of, like, trying to schedule things among a bunch of teenagers, like, no, that doesn't make sense, like, how is that really gonna work?
When you think about it from our perspective, and like if you're in the comedy world, you might know this. Like comics use this thing called slotted. It's how we like have open mics and then we all text each other. And Katie and I are, in group text. We're kind of in like this, we roll in the same friend group, whatever. And just like trying to organize us, like adult women who have cars and,
Smartphones,
right? Like is hard
docs,
enough.
yeah.
So the fact that these like eighth graders are like, don't worry, Dr. Johansson, we got it. Like,
Yeah, and they all have other stuff going on too. Like,
right?
they have, like, homework and stuff. Like, how are they balancing it all? It is aspirational.
Well, I guess that kind of is a good way for us to kick off this episode that we watched, which I asked you to watch this episode, Claudia and the Mystery of the Secret Passageway. What was your experience with the Babysitters Club TV show growing up, if
I
any?
definitely remember watching it. I remember watching it when it came out. I remember, for some reason, it wasn't in this episode, but I remember this exterior shot of one of their houses, and then it was very, like, big and old and, like, cool, very, like, East Coast vibes. I definitely remember watching it, but I didn't really remember, like, when I watched this episode, I didn't really remember any of the specifics.
Yeah.
But I remember being very excited when it came out.
Yeah, and if people don't remember, it was a 30-minute show and it came out first on VHS and then it got picked up by HBO, which like we did not have HBO growing up. We had cable, we did not have HBO. I honestly, I didn't even have friends who had HBO. Like that's the kind of childhood that I like people would have
Right.
cable, but like you would hear about HBO cuz someone would be like I went to my nana's friend's house and she had HBO. Like, that would be like a kid in 3rd grade announcing to the class.
Yeah, it was not ubiquitous like it is now. I must have watched the VHSs because we definitely did not have HBO. I almost was wondering, like, did this show on PBS at some point? Because like, that would have made more sense if I had seen it on PBS, but this is also totally the kind of show my parents would have, like, bought on VHS for me. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Because
or, like, taken out from the library or
yes.
something.
Yeah.
Yes.
Or maybe it was
Yes.
because I noticed that it was produced by Scholastic, so, like, maybe the videos were available through the, like, Scholastic, like, flyer or, like, right? Didn't we get, like,
Yeah, you
Scholastic?
would get it and then you would fill it out, and then, like, a month later, you get your books.
Yes,
Like, I could totally see these being in
yes,
there, and
yes.
I remember this one because it was my mom bought it for me on VHS, and it was before, I believe, February vacation, and I was so excited because, like, I mean, a new VHS of something I'd never seen the show before. Claudia wasn't, like, my absolute favorite. I was a big Stacy girl because I think, like, I just thought she was so cosmopolitan because she lived half the time in New York City, which, like, honestly, in hindsight, Meredith, you were right. That is very cosmopolitan to live half the time in New York City,
Yeah, well, first of all, I do not remember that detail at all. That is so cool. I mean,
right?
that actually is, like, still,
Like,
like,
even as an adult, you're like, "Oh, wow, yeah, that's
you
fucking
spend half your
cool."
time in New York, that's, like, the coolest. Like, you're
Right?
whatever's happening, you're crushing it.
Yeah.
I do not remember that at all. So, Claudia s in my mind, Claudia was the one with diabetes, but clearly I, like, somehow mixed that up. Claudia was the cool one.
Very artistic, very creative.
Artist Yes, and that, like, in the episode, it jogged my memory. I was like, "Oh, yeah, no, Claudia was, like, the really cool one," and you can tell in the episode, like, she's got the coolest clothes, like, she's kind of like, a bit of a leader, and, you can just kinda tell, like, even though the other girls have a lot going on, like, she's, like, the cool one.
She is the cool one. You can tell she is sort of like the one that they all look to for approval,
Yes.
etcetera. She's definitely got a very, like, alpha personality, and we'll get to the other alpha in the group. But the episode starts off with all of the girls, gathering together in the park with, I'm not gonna lie, a killer theme song.
The theme song is great. The opening is so fucking wholesome. I mean, not only are they at a park in this, like, idyllic town, but, like, the older girls are hanging out with the younger girls and everyone's being nice to each other.
Yes,
Like,
and
what?
they're looking at photos of themselves from their childhood
Yeah.
because they are going to make a bulletin board that will go in front of the library called Stony Brook through the years. Stony Brook is the town that they live in. And this to me, Katie, though, was the moment where I thought, these are narcissists.
That is so funny. That is
How do
so
you feel about that?
Well, I mean, they're all so into the pictures. They're just like, "Oh my god, look at this, and look at this, and look at this," and I mean, they're narcissists, but they're also, like, really focused on the task at hand, you know?
Yes, they're hardworking narcissists, but I was like,
Yeah,
wow, imagine being like, hey guys, check it out. I'm going to make a bulletin board for my town. Who am I going to put on it? Pictures of me.
of us, the story of us, but also, like, they completely gloss over it, but, like, someone had to, like, assemble all of these photos, like, that would take, like, probably months, and you'd have to, like, ask each of the parents, and you'd have to, like, track them down, and, I mean, the fact that anyone even, like, let them have these photos because they look
Or
like
let
they
them have
were
this
real.
bulletin board. Like,
Right. Like, are they so powerful that the town is just like, "Of course, we're gonna let the Babysitters Club have control of the bulletin board."
in front of the library so they can post photos of themselves. I, firstly, I think Marianne probably got stuck with a lot of the fucking work.
Oh, is she the one with the curly hair?
No, that was
I
Mallory.
thought she
She
was
definitely
Mallory.
got stuck. Marianne is the one with the brown hair who seems like she seems depressed and like that's okay because life is hard.
Yeah.
But like when they're like planning the séance, which we'll get to, Marianne's like, I don't like it, but I'll allow it. I was like,
Oh, that
okay,
one, yes.
Eeyore, shut
Yeah,
up.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So they're getting ready for the big bulletin board and what really kicks things off is that Dawn and Claudia go over to Dawn's beautiful farmhouse and they have to get the bulletin board, which Dawn's like, oh, it was in my way, so I put it in the secret passage. And she proceeds to go to the most unhinged place that you would ever store anything. Katie, please
100%.
walk the listeners through where Dawn chose to put the bulletin board.
Well, it's an attic, but it's an attic that's only accessible via a secret passage, which I mean, I guess makes sense because they do reference that the house is from the 1700s, which is unhinged. Like, it's a house from the 1700s that's been maintained and is still
Yeah,
livable in
like,
America?
we're not buying it. Wow,
What are
the
we talking
'90s
about?
were wild. We really
Yeah, and suddenly they're in this, like, creepy, presumably cobweb-ridden attic that's dark, and yeah, like, why she would put it up there, how did the bulletin board is too big to get through the secret passage, first of all.
right.
So, that's not adding up. And then they get up there and they're, like, touching the, like, wall or, like, some sort of, like, beam, and they're like, "Oh, wait a minute, here's a letter." I mean, none of it makes sense. That you don't even see them retrieve the bulletin board. I don't even think the bulletin board is
Yeah, they're
up.
like, "Oh, fuck Stony Brook through the years now, like, we've
Yeah,
found this letter."
the old letter.
So
We've
they
got
find
this.
this note
Yes.
and it details the story of a woman losing a ring, her sister's ring. And it's written by a woman named Flora, and she discusses the fact that she has lost her sister Bettina's ring, and Bettina is so upset, and Flora is saying she didn't lose the ring, and she doesn't think that Bettina will ever forgive her. And of course, the Babysitters Club glom onto this as their mystery. They take the note back to the meeting where Christy is dressed like Sherlock Holmes and reads the letter out loud for the first time. Why do you believe Christy was dressed like Sherlock Holmes? Did she have that costume already? What was happening there?
I have to imagine that the hat was just sitting around, and then someone was like, "It's a mystery," and she was like, "Let me put on my mystery solving hat," because otherwise it makes no sense. And
She
also, why would she have that hat?
right?
Like, I mean, I guess an old Halloween costume, but, like, even
Yeah.
that doesn't really make sense. I mean, that's not, like, a popular costume from the era.
Honestly, though, Christy kind of seems like somebody who would go as a Sherlock Holmes detective, and she'd make Marianne go as Watson. Like, so they, they find the letter and they're trying to kind of figure out what the meaning of it is. And at the same time, Claudia is doing the most relatable thing in the entire book and entire TV show, which is she's struggling with her math homework, and her sister Janine is meant to help her. Do you feel like a sibling tutoring their other sibling is an effective way of, getting a better grasp on arithmetic?
Absolutely not. And specifically with the dynamic that these 2 have, because they're, like, somewhat close in age, and they're obviously very different. Claudia is, like, artsy, cool, and her sister is, like, a nerd, like,
Right.
full on, says, does not speak. I mean, the sister is so annoying.
Oh my god, you really don't like Janine, huh?
Well, it's not like I feel for Janine because
Yes.
Janine has such a cool sister and she's like a math nerd, but it's hard to root for her because she's like kind of insufferable.
Yeah, she's kind of mean.
Yeah, she's not nice. She doesn't she almost like it's like, are you living in the same world as everybody else? Like she's using SAT words in a way that's like very conspicuous, you know?
Yes. And, you know, to be fair, maybe the real narcissist is Janine.
I mean, she's kind of an asshole.
Yeah.
Like she doesn't seem nice,
No. The babysitters want to solve the mystery of what happened to the ring, what happened to Bettina, what happened to Flora. So they do what anyone would do. They decide to have a seance in the attic to
Right.
try to connect with the ghosts. What is your experience with Ouija boards, Katy Flaherty?
Well, so I personally have never like used a Ouija board. My experience with Ouija boards,
That shocks me.
I know. Well, and to be honest, like if someone were to just like bust one out, I'd be like, hell yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
Um, but I feel like it's more something that is like constantly referenced in popular culture. And maybe it's because I had no older siblings or cousins, but like I just like maybe once I've encountered a Ouija board in real life, you know? Um
Wow.
And
I loved the Ouija board. I used to play with the Ouija board all the time. My cousins and I were really into contacting the dead.
God,
And I
I
don't
love it.
think the girls actually had a Ouija board in this. I just feel like they should have. They were really just having a seance. But when we would have one, we kind of like looked at it as a combo. And we used to contact two people quite frequently. And those two people were Kurt Cobain and Nicole Brown Simpson.
Wow. And would they show up, like, together?
No, they usually showed up separately,
Okay, that makes
but we had
sense.
solved the OJ case, just in case you were wondering.
I'm not surprised at all. Well, it wouldn't be that hard because she could just tell you.
Right.
Yeah.
And, like, now in hindsight, looking back, I guess I've never really thought about it that much, but we would often be at my aunt's house. We would go up and we would do it and we would, contact the dead. And then we would come downstairs and like we would just to the adults be like, "You're not gonna believe it. We talked to Nicole Brown Simpson." Just like the like now looking at that through the lens of an adult, like that's so insane. Like imagine a 9-year-old coming downstairs and being like, "Hey guys, check it out. We were able to contact Nicole Brown Simpson up there." Like that's insane.
Well, it's so funny that you weren't, like, contacting, like, grandma or, like, a dead relative or, it's like you're really digging into the pop culture of the day. It actually really makes sense.
It does make sense. And honestly, I mean, much more useful than contacting grandma, right?
Well, 100%, you solved the OJ murder, like, that's huge.
So they are in the attic, they are having their seance, and Christy, who I would say wants to be the cool one in the group, wants to be the ringleader, finds the ring. She finds the missing ring that Flora had written about in the letter.
Which, once again, like, things aren't adding up because they're in the first of all, they're in the attic in the dark.
Right.
That's insane. There's spiders up there. But okay. And then in the dark, lit only by candlelight, she finds the ring just, like, on the ground?
I feel like Christy had the ring the whole time.
Oh.
She's shady.
I mean, honestly, that makes more sense,
I
like,
mean,
logically.
being the head of the babysitters club just I think automatically is red flag.
Mhm. Mhm. There's a little
Because
megalomania going on.
yeah, like
Yeah.
she's the president of the babysitters club. Like now we would never have hierarchy in the babysitters club.
Oh, totally.
And so and I think she resents Claudia because Claudia is so cool,
Claudia is so cool. It's undeniable.
which just side note, side question, how old would you peg these actors during this show? Because they are supposed to be portraying 8th grade girls.
I mean, they're definitely older than that. Some of them I think, like, Claudia could be the actress playing Claudia could be 18.
Yes.
A young 18, a young
Yes.
looking 18. So, some of the older girls probably are.
Yes.
Um, they're I mean, they're not even acting like 8th graders.
No.
Like, and how do they even get I mean, I guess their town is so small that they just walk everywhere, but they just sort of, like, are everywhere together. Suddenly, they're at the grocery store.
Yeah, and they have way more money than me even as an adult because they're loading up their cart with groceries for the seance and like they bought 24 apples.
There was so much they were throwing in that cart. I mean, who where is the I mean, I know that they have jobs, and I guess maybe they're, like, pooling their money, but that grocery cart was full. Also, the behavior in the grocery store was so unhinged. They're, like, throwing bags of cereal.
Yes.
I'm like, "That's gonna get crunched." They're throwing loose bunches of carrots into the cart, and the carrots are falling into, like, the crevices of the cart. Like, these girls are feral.
They are feral and now they feel they can really solve this mystery because now they have the ring as well. So it's
Okay.
funny because they end up taking the ring to a jeweler who helps them trace down the family of these two young women who had at one point owned the grocery store, and so they go into the grocery store and like surprise surprise, the very nice store owner is like basically like, I don't know, like I can't help you too much. I'm like, yeah, because like literally yesterday you guys were like just like knocking things off the shelves.
Yes. Yes. Also, the grocery store owner is, like, also restocking the produce, like, with, like, a very quaint basket that is, like, hugely inefficient. Like, it just doesn't.
He's like, "Oh, great. Here come the fucking babysitters again. They're probably not even
Yeah,
gonna
I'm trying
buy
to, like, run
anything."
this small business by myself.
You know, Christy too is like, "I'm a small business owner too."
We're the same.
One of the problems with the Babysitters Club in that, like, you and I were probably younger than the 8th grade when we were consuming it, is that you think
100%.
by, like, the 8th grade, "Okay, here's what it's gonna be like. I'm gonna have a small business. I'm gonna have a decent rapport with a grocer."
Yeah, I'm gonna be, like, loading up grocery carts,
Like,
summoning the dead.
right? And ultimately solving a mystery, I don't know, because they continue to try to find these sisters, and it leads them to a floral shop, and it is, turns out, run by Bettina. And so the babysitters storm in and are basically demanding of Bettina to see Flora. And at first, they're a little nervous because they're like, "My God, like Bettina, from the letter, sounded like she was a pretty scary older sister." And just when the babysitters believe that Bettina may or may not be a murderer, Flora returns to the shop because she actually runs the shop with Bettina. And Flora is played by Kelly Bishop of Gilmore Girls, which I was a little like, whoa. If anyone was a Gilmore Girls fan, Emily Gilmore, who I think is an iconic character,
The grandma.
the grandmother in Gilmore Girls, is Flora in this episode
I
of
absolutely.
Babysitter's Club. You gotta go back and watch it again. I know it took me like 2 tries and I was like, wait a minute." So, anyway, they return the ring and we find out that actually perhaps the biggest narcissist is Bettina because she is still kind of a bitch to Flora about the ring. Thoughts?
Here's what's sticking with me.
What stuck with you? Please tell me.
The tape. So they find this letter, right? And they think they have to summon the dead because the house is super old and the letter is presumably also super old. But then somebody is like, well, my mom told me it has transparent tape didn't exist back then. So the transparent tape on the letter, because it was taped to the wall of the crawl space, is the crucial moment where they're like, oh, this person could be alive.
Right.
Tape isn't that old.
Which is actually pretty smart. I think that Janine does give us that clue, but, like, I also was like, "Who the fuck would, like, tape this letter?" It's like, I'm gonna write it, and then I'm gonna tape
None
it.
of it makes sense. In the crawl space, I'm gonna tape it to the letter of the attic.
Like, you would write it in, like, your little diary.
Yeah, or you'd, like, leave it for your sister or, like, burn it or I don't know, bury anything would make more sense than taping it to a beam in the attic.
But Bettina's when we catch up with a present day Bettina, she kinda still seems to be, like, a little salty about the ring missing.
Yes, but also, this episode is about nothing if not sisterhood, and
Yes.
sisterhood is complicated.
So complicated.
There are conflicts, but ultimately, you remember that you love each other. I
And it
mean, that's really
closes with
true
this
love.
beautiful picnic, right?
Yes,
Like, it is this beautiful picnic that it ends with, and all the sisters come and they invite Flora and Bettina, which is, like, a little weird because it's, like, all a bunch of 8th grade girls and then, like, just 2, like, women in their 60s.
yes, and is it Flor one of them stays up all night making flower crowns for
It's
them,
gotta be Flora.
right?
It has to be Flora. Poor Flora, like, she's still getting the shit under the
Which
stick.
makes no sense. Like, she stayed up all night making flower crowns for these 8th graders to have a picnic?
I will say, the bulletin board does get completed, which is
It does,
great.
which is amazing considering they're spending all their time on this mystery.
I know. They probably made, like, the little sisters do it in the end and Marianne,
That makes sense.
but
They have to be delegating.
I do kinda love when the bulletin board is finished and they're like, "Look at all these buildings," because there's also old photos of of the town of Stony Brook,
Oh,
and
yes.
I believe Mallory's younger sister just exclaims, "That's where the Great Flood happened," and you're like, "Whoa, whoa," like, and then we get like, description of the Great Flood. I'm like, "Okay, was this, like, the molasses flood? Did anybody die?" Like, I was like,
Right.
"You just dropped a bomb on us." Like, what is the Great Flood? Can you guess where it was shot?
Oh, was it like Thousand Oaks or something?
Well, you know what's so funny? You know where I immediately, as a native Angelino, I feel like you'll say, "Okay, yeah, Meredith, I could see why you would think that." I thought, "Oh, they filmed this in Pasadena."
Oh, no, 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 that really makes sense. The vibes are very Pasadena, and the house that I remember that isn't they the exterior shot is not in this episode, but the house that I remember is very, like, old Pasadena,
And
like a
if
green and
people
green house or something.
Right. I always tell people, like, if you wanna, like, think of what Pasadena looks like, it doesn't look as much like the rest of LA, like, where
Right.
and there's beautiful parts of LA. I'm not don't calm down, everybody. I'm not knocking places that aren't Pasadena, but the Father of the Bride house is in Pasadena, and that, I think, perfectly sums it up. And so, I do think Pasadena looks much more East Coast. It was actually, though, filmed in Pelham, New York, which is in Westchester County. So I was like, "Huh, Meredith, not everything happens in LA."
Right. That's right. Well, and I'm not surprised because that is, like, the vibe. That is the vibe of the town.
Well, Katie, we have learned so much about, your place in your family as an oldest of everything. Much respect. And we've also learned so much about the Babysitters Club.
Yes, and sisterhood.
For sure. Katie, where can people find you?
You can find me on Instagram, at Katy Flaherty Comedy, and if you are an IRL sort of person, I'm at the Crow in Santa Monica a lot, doing open mics and attending shows, and hopefully soon, like, being in a show. So, yeah,
Book this woman.
book this woman.
She
I'm
can give you
available.
20 minutes on the Babysitters Club.
That's right. That's right, or virtually any topic.
Katie, I want to thank you for coming on the episode. You've
Just
been a
thank you so
fantastic
much.
guest. And yeah, follow Katie on Instagram and come see Katie at the Crow. All right. Thanks, Katie.
Thank you so much.